Do you have any favorite episodes?
Yes. Probably the George Lazenby, Britt Eklund doubleheader where Superboy
As
meets
a James Bond author
Jor-El.
and fan, I knew you were going to say that one. Like, I was like, if he doesn't get to Bond Girl and Bond himself. Joining me now is one of my favorite authors. He likes to delve into the world of pop culture. His latest book is called Look Up in the Sky, the Forgotten Superboy Series. Time to welcome back to the show Mark Edlitz. Mark, good to have you back in the Comic Book Central lair.
I am so happy to be here. I am an avid listener.
Oh, I appreciate it. I'm an avid reader. I like having another nerd book in the Comic Book Central Lair library, so we can I'm old school, right? Appreciate you sending me that. I got to flip through the pages. Digital versions are cool, but I like flipping through the pages on this one. Here's the thing: in your previous books, we've talked about this last time we had you on the show. You've taken on James Bond, you've taken on other superheroes, you've taken on less than memorable movie sequels. Now, even by your own title, a forgotten superhero TV series from the late 80s to the early 90s, that would be Superboy. Why did you choose Superboy as your topic this time around?
That question, I'll try to answer it briefly, but to answer the question really takes a book length
I
answer.
was going to say I ain't going anywhere, so take your time. I don't have a hot date after this. That's we're good.
I was trying to understand why why the TV series existed. I was wondering what were the sort of forces that made the show happen. Today we're really hip to Marvel and Star Wars having movies and TV shows and going back and forth and having the stars go back and forth. So we're really media literate in that way. But in the late 80s, early 90s, it was less common. And I didn't understand why a popular movie series with an iconic performance, arguably the best ever, Christopher Reeve, Superman, how that became a syndicated series that ran for 4 seasons and that people still don't really know about. And
Right.
and syndicated, it's important to remind ourselves is that there's network TV, there's cable, but there's also syndicated where you just make a show and you sell it territory to territory, and you hope that enough territories buy your show or license your show so that enough people see it. And so
Right.
I found that was all really an interesting question. And so to go about answering it, I do what everyone does, which is I write a book.
Of course. I just read the book. I just wait for you to do all the work, all the heavy lifting, and then I just sit there and flip through and do a rewatch on it. And you mentioned the key thing is like it's not like somebody saw the Christopher Reeve movies and went and the Richard Donner films and even you talked about four in one of your books, the crazy production behind that. It wasn't like somebody looked at that and then decided to do their own Superboy series. It was like the Salkinds. They were the ones that started all of the Superman and even did Supergirl the movie.
Well, right.
So this
It
is
was
coming
just
out like how does that go from big screen to small screen like that, right?
so you're absolutely right. It's a Alexander and Ilya Salkind production. I will take this moment to have everyone go back to one of your first 10 episodes and check
Yeah.
out that Ilya Salkind interview. It's a classic. Uh,
To say the least.
yeah, it really,
I
really
even
is.
think, yeah. I like you and I talked off mic. I'm gonna have to release the director's cut of that one of these
You really got
days.
it. You really got it. There was it is the Superboy TV series, also called The Adventures of Superboy, as you
Hmm.
correctly stated, is an Alexander and Ilya Salkind production. So there's a Superboy fan named Peter Marino, Marino, who was working in Chicago in radio and some TV, and he was always a Superboy fan. And so his little weird claim to fame is Barbara Streisand and Neil Diamond both had solo singles of "You Don't Bring Me Flowers." We know the duet, but at that period they both had solo recordings of it. He was one of two DJs or he wasn't a DJ. He's one of two producers who combined that and created the idea of a need for that. And so then Barbra Streisand and Neil Diamond recorded it together. Anyway, so he had this crazy idea. I'd really like to see a Superboy series. And he contacted Ilya Salkind, who said, "You got to talk to Dad." And then that's how the
He's
show
the one
got,
with the money.
yeah.
Right.
And that's how the show got going. And
That's the thing
yeah,
I learned in the book is because even going through, you watch the series, I interview the cast. Thank you for the shout out to Comic Book Central, by the way. I appreciate that in the book as well, because the cast and crew have been here previously. But even just looking through this, I'm learning new things because you mentioned Peter Marino. Because if you watch the first season, I kind of went after I, started reading the book, I went, oh, I never caught this before. I went and looked at the first season, never mentioned. And then like halfway through season two, I think it's episode 15. Yeah, season two, episode 15. There's this weird little credit that pops up right before Superboy, created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, that says series suggested for television by Peter R. Marino. That's not even a credit. That's not even a thing, right? Like it's not a
it
producer. It's not.
it is unusual. You are correct, and it is
Yeah.
unusual wording for that credit of someone who came up with the idea.
Right.
In this case, I spoke to, and he did. Series suggested by that is an accurate statement, and it's a credit
It's
because
so
it is an accurate
specific.
statement.
Right. Right.
And one of the things that I wanted to write the book, you to write a book, there has to be a few, for me, there has to be a few reasons. One, is this a new topic that people haven't covered before? Can I add something new? Nobody's written a book about Superboy. I was in the clear there. But
Right.
one of the things I also thought was interesting, and one of the things I like to do in my books, uh, one of them is called The Lost Adventures of James Bond, and that's about the third and fourth Timothy Dalton unmade movies, and James
Yeah, the
Bond,
ones that didn't
the
get made.
animated series. Is I like to find something, a piece of history that needs a little bit of sunlight on it. And I thought, how cool that this person who is outside of Alexander Ilya orbit had this
Right.
idea, contacted them, and then it became 100 episodes of something.
Right. Had you been watching the series as a rewatch for the book and then caught that? Like, how did you know to look into that aspect? Because I even checked on the Wikipedia page, which gets, a good breakdown of the series overall, but doesn't even mention him
He's not
in it.
mentioned.
And you're right. It's this rando little, I don't know, is it even a 2 second blip of a credit pops up? Yeah. When did you first figure out to dig into that nugget of Superboy history?
I don't, I, I don't remember the moment. I don't remember the moment. I do know that there were a couple of people who were talking about it online. I don't remember if I
Okay.
had started writing the book or if that was the thing that, because I mean I've had this idea for this book for a
Right.
while. But I don't remember which came first, the chicken or the egg in that specific instant.
But as you're doing research, you're digging around probably in fan groups and different things and seeing
Yes, oh,
comments
absolutely.
bouncing back and forth, and all of a sudden it's like, whoa, where'd this little thing come from?
Exactly,
We find that
exactly.
in Indiana Jones world all the time. There's these obscure little things that you find after the 40th time watching it that you're like, oh, that might be a thing. So no, I
Well,
thought that was interesting.
and you make an excellent point about fan groups because fan groups are an excellent source of eagle-eyed readers or viewers. But
Right.
sometimes, as in the case of Superboy, there's a lot of incorrect information. And one of the things that I discovered throughout the book is that a lot of the established lore about Superboy is inaccurate in terms of a lot of the rumors about the circumstances where the first Superboy left the series, why the series ended, plans for TV movies, all of that is sort of wrong. And so I
Right. Yeah,
thought,
you deal with that too, like
yeah,
going from one Superboy actor to another, John Newton to George Christopher, and then there were so many rumors about that at the time, and it's like you break a lot of that down, and get into the specifics of it. So that's a good part of the read as well.
And even the ratings, I've always heard that the show, and even the people affiliated with the show, um, always said, oh, the ratings were good. And it is true that when the show started season one, episode one, the ratings were spectacular.
Right.
6.2, 5.7, really good numbers for a syndicated show. Uh, but it did drop off from season to season. And I proved that through like Variety and other sources. I think there's a magazine called Broadcasting
Right.
and some wonderful human being on the internet who had a subscription to these things just send me clippings. So I was able to chart what happened. And I should say, even though there was a steady slippage from top 10 to top 15 to not really being on the boards at all.
Mhm.
So not even top 15, 20 by the time of the end of season four. Still one of the better performers for Viacom. So
Right.
one of the things I try to do is put all this in context. Is you just can't get the ratings uh, by themselves. You have to see how does that do compared to other shows, whether they're talk shows, original show, dramatic shows, action shows, comedy shows. Um, but how does it do for the specific network or Viacom, the people paid for it? If it's the number one show for them, that's still pretty good, even though it's not the top 15 anymore. So it's really complicated.
Right. And that's the thing in syndication, it was a whole different world back then too. I mean, things were measured differently. You talk about the fact, even now that reaches down all the way down through the book down to today, when it's so hard to even find the series because you've got the Salkinds, you've got Warner Brothers involved at one point, you've got Viacom, this distribution outlet involved, and we see that when you go to put out home media releases, that all becomes entangled in lawsuits and everything.
It
So we'll
all
talk a
becomes
little bit
really,
about
really,
that.
it really becomes
Yeah.
really, really complicated. So I should just, as an overview, say the book is a couple of things. One, if it's written for people who have never heard of the show or have only seen it when they were a kid back in the late 80s, early 90s. So you don't have to be intimately familiar with the show or the circumstances around it. My job is to get you there so that you could get something out of this book, even if you are not watching it. And so there are episode recaps, if you will, and I do speak to the two Superboys, Gerard Christopher, John Newton, Stacey, Stacey Hydeck, who played Lana Lang. But I also interviewed the writers and showrunners like Stan Berkowitz, Mike Carlin,
Carrie Bates. I thought just the
Carrie
fact you got
Bates,
Carrie
Carrie Bates,
Bates was
the great
coming
Carrie
in what
Bates.
season one and season two of just bringing that comic book, these comic book writers bringing that Superboy mindset and the characters in.
Yeah,
That is really
that was so critical. And then and Julia Pistor and who ran season three and four. So there's four seasons, but there's each season has three of those four seasons have different showrunners slash
right,
creators, including Ilya, as who I did interview, Ilya Salkind, who I do interview, and David Nutter, the great director of the X-Files. I also got an interview with
right.
him. But it's also it not only does it try to and this, not only does it try to provide context for the show, but I was curious about this character, Superboy. Where did he come from? And I will briefly, which is not my strong suit when I'm talking, but I will briefly say that Jerry Siegel wanted to do a Superboy spin-off character from almost the moment that he co-created Superman with Joe Shuster. Um, and
Back in the late 30s, early 40s, right.
Correctamundo. And he pitched Siegel pitched it to DC, the character of Superboy. DC said no thanks. He pitched it 2 years later. They didn't even say no thanks. Jerry Siegel goes to the army to serve the country, and DC uses his old story to run the first Superboy comic. something that he's always wanted to do. So they use his stuff to almost create it, quote, 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 in his absence. And so
Right.
there's a lawsuit, and that started back then, goes, starts in 1945, and then goes all the way to today with Smallville. And it's even as Superman, the new movie is being released, there's still lawsuits. But this,
I was gonna say there's always the lawsuit that pops up. That's all. Every time there's a new Superman project or anything involving that, you hear about that.
yeah, absolutely. And one of the fun things for me is that there was a legal ruling about whether Superboy and Superman were the same character, because as
Right.
because it's like Superboy couldn't really existed in Superman's timeline because everyone would have known that Clark and Superboy both are from Smallville, and
Right.
the gig is up. But so it doesn't really make sense. So there was a legal ruling establishing that Superman and Superboy were two distinct and separate entities, which I just love that that's law. That is law.
Right, right. And that plays out in the book. That's why I say, even if you haven't seen the series, or if you can't get your hands on the series right now, or you're trying to get your hands on the series, the book itself plays out as a very cool story, even on the history of the character. We talked about that. Like, there's even multiple versions of Superboy that when you come in the comic books, because at one point he was wiped out, by Crisis, and then all of a sudden brought back in, and then you've got the Superboy that's sort of the reign of the Superman. There's just all these different iterations of the character too, that come in, and I love how a lot of that plays. And then there hadn't been a lot done with the character, like you mentioned. It took until the '60s, I think '61, with the pilot. There was a TV pilot that sort of sprang out of the
Oh,
George
the
Reeves
Johnny
series.
Rockwell. Yeah,
Yeah, so there
yeah.
was that little thing, and then a few years later, there was a Superboy cartoon and had crypto in it. But there wasn't a whole lot with the character. So to develop this series and to have it go 4 seasons, and as you'll read in the book, if you didn't know already, they were trying to, the producers were trying, or the Viacom was trying to get to a finish line. We got to get 100 episodes. Back in the day, you had to have, to sell it as a package, you had to have 100. Everybody tried to get to 100 episodes, and then it was like, whether it was doing well or not, you probably cut ties with it.
Yeah,
So
that
there's
was
just all these machinations and all these politics and all these things are going on, and you play them out in the book amazingly, and you interview a lot of the folks involved in it at that time too.
yeah, I mean, as you correctly stated, 100 was the magic number that they were going to
Yeah.
for syndication, and that was Viacom's number one priority, even though that the people involved were still going strong.
When you're going back, so I'm assuming you went back and just did a rewatch of the whole series
Oh, for
at some point,
sure.
just
Yeah.
taking notes and everything down. When you were going back and doing the research, aside from getting on a fan board and finding out about this obscure little credit that launched the series, other than that, was there anything that surprised you in doing a rewatch of the series, or did you dig anything up, or did you go back to an old interview and go, "Oh man, I'd forgotten about that little gem"?
Yeah, a lot. One is that the form of the show kept on changing. Not only does it begin as Superboy and becomes the new Adventures of Superboy, and not only does it start with John Newton as Superboy and then get Gerard Christopher, but the first season is set at Schuster University with a set of uh, four characters, and by season two, three of those characters are gone,
Gone.
and they're gone. Different creatives, different vibe. And then by season three, they abandoned the university setting altogether, put them in the Bureau of Extra Normal Matters, which is a comic book acronym for bug-eyed monsters. That Sam Berkowitz told me. Um,
And it was
and
kind of X Files. I've talked about this on the show before. It was kind of X Files before the X Files was X
it was
Files.
X-Files before X-Files.
That's
And
right.
so, so you get sort of over the course of these 4 seasons, you get three or four very different vibes, which is very
Yeah.
interesting. And one of the things that surprised me is, well, two of the things that surprised me is one, I kept my first imaginary draft either on in writing or in my head was like I kept on saying the word low budget TV show, and then people were correcting me saying yes, the first season was on the lower budget, but by the second and certainly the third, they kept on they meaning Viacom believed in the show, did not want to see it canceled, and put more money into it. So sometimes shows go up because you're giving more money to the actors and performers. But in this case, they were better production value. Season 3 and 4 look more professional and polished by far than season one. And then the other thing is it's the show is it's ostensibly a kid show, but there is some intense action in it. There's one episode where Lana Lang is being chased by a person who's got a lit welding thing. I forgot what it's called off
Hmm.
the top of my head. Where she's being tormented by that. And another
Right.
Leif Garrett is a rock star who's trying to get her to scream so he could put her screams in his songs. And in another one, Lex Luthor finds Darla, who is his sidekick in the Miss Tessmacher vein, at a strip club. Uh, so it's like these are it's a kid show, and you could say, well, that some of that goes over a kid's head, and and the strip
Yeah.
club might, but the rest is fairly intense. And Julia Pistorius, one of the key people who made seasons 3 and 4 so great, is she said, we weren't necessarily as well calibrated as we would be today in handling the things. And I think that might be one of the reasons why it's not widely available, because it's serving so many different masters. And Sam
Right.
Berkowitz made a metaphor, which I'm going to butcher right now, about having two stools, one for children, one for adults, and the show falling somewhere in between. So that,
Yeah.
yeah, so yeah,
That's when you watch it in its entirety. Obviously, if you're watching week by week over 4 years, but now if you get your hands on it and you binge it, it's like you can tell these radical differences. And I think that goes to a credit to Ilya Salkind too, because he talked about there's always the problem with superhero shows where, and you saw this in the George Reeves era of Superman, of they didn't bring villains in from the comic. They couldn't afford villains from the comic books. It would have been too much. So there was like a lot of, bad guys or bad people doing bad things or something like that. And I think Ilya saw that those were sort of mundane storylines, and then really, like you said, changed everything in season two. To his credit, things that weren't working, he just changed everything around, made Lex Luthor a lot more like the comic books. Brought in, he was always wanting to bring in like Brainiac into the movies. So you've got all these comic book villains, Mister Mixus coming in, and Bizarro, Metallo, like all these different things. And then, like you said, a completely radical change in 3 and 4. So dark, such a different turn, complete change of environment. Yeah, there's so much you can get out of it as a viewer. Um, why do you think it is? And we talked a little bit about some of the reasons, but overall, it is on Amazon. You can get it. The DVD, I mean, the DVDs came out. Warner's did an official released this season one, and then the other ones were sort of like made to order
yeah, print on demand.
kind of
And
a
not
deal.
and
Like
that
if you,
even and even that didn't immediately follow. So from
it was like
1992,
6 years later.
yeah, it was a few years later. I can't remember how many it was.
Okay.
Was it six? I've got it in the book, but I'm terrible with dates off
Oh,
the
I
top.
mean, from season one release to like season two. I
Yeah,
think there was
yeah,
like 6 years in between those two.
yeah. I mean, so from 1992 to 2006, you couldn't really get it.
Right.
Superman 2006, as you all know, Superman Returns comes out, so they're like, oh, we'll there'll be renewed interest in Superman. Maybe someone will like the series. The season one is not as strong as the other seasons. They were still
Yeah.
finding their way, and so the DVD of season one, they put extras on it. They made an effort, but it didn't sell
Yeah, I
like
mean,
this.
here it is, a Superboy getting off the ground, so it's like making a featurette. You got that. You've got commentaries on 2 episodes. You got John Noonan's screen test, and then, like you said, they're coming into Superman. If you're watching the Brandon Routh pictures right behind me, but they're coming into the movie, so like you've got part of the documentary on Superman, including the new movie. So they used almost this DVD set to sell the movie, to
Right?
sell the new
Yeah,
movie coming out.
yeah.
They saw a marketing opportunity there, so that was huge.
And then it didn't do so as well, and so that they years later they put it print on demand. which is
Right.
good because it is available, but you're not going to discover it unless you know about it. You're not going to go into Barnes and Noble and go, oh, Superboy season two, I'm going to pick it up. And
Right.
it was never syndicated, which was their, what's really not funny. What what was
That was the
unfortunate
goal, right?
is that
That
it was
was
the
the goal
whole
to
goal
do
was
the
to reach 100 to syndicate it. They
yes.
did reach 100, and they didn't syndicate it. And I spoke to the
Yeah.
Viacom reps who the different two. I spoke to a couple of people in Viacom who talked to me about how it came to them and what their plans were. And it started out as a lead in to prime time, which is to say from 7 to 8 was how the show was conceived and sold. And by the time you get to season two, three, and four, it's 2 a.m., 3 a.m., and you go that hurts the
Wherever it
ratings,
was.
but
Yeah, wherever it was.
it also was moved there because the ratings were dropping. It's a little bit of a chicken and egg thing. And I had some other wonderful point that I will never make. So,
No, it just that was the whole thing was that they were trying to get there in syndication, and I
oh
think the frustration plays out in the book.
yes, and then one of the things that I really want to so Peter J. Fernandez is an actor who was in seasons 3 and 4, and he played one of uh, Matt. He played the character Matt was one of Clark's and Lana's colleagues at the Bureau for Extra Normal Matters, and I asked him this question. It must have been disappointing for you to not have your work out there, and he said, yes, it's true. But there's another reason it's hard is actors rely on syndication even more so than the paycheck that you get. It's the syndicated money that
The
helps
residuals.
the actors, the residuals that helps them, and there's other benefits that might apply to healthcare and all that. And
Right.
so I asked, I expected the answer to be, it's tough when your work isn't seen, but he correctly elevated the question by talking about the perhaps unintended consequences to the Viacom executives of what happens when you don't syndicate a show. What does that do to the people who work on it? In addition to
Right.
it becoming a lost piece of media.
Well, because and for viewers home that maybe younger ones that don't realize, like when you think about shows like Gilligan's Island that were like forever in syndication, and Star Trek forever in syndication, those deals weren't made when those shows were being produced, so the actors never got those. So once you did have syndication, people like us that grew up watching shows 5 days a week at at 3 o'clock in the afternoon or whatever, then they realized, oh, maybe we should start working those things into the contract. The weird thing about Superboy is that Warner's didn't necessarily own it or own a big enough piece of it, I guess. It was a Viacom thing. Whereas with something like Lois and Clark, they did. So I think that played a huge role into it. And then didn't the rights revert from the Salkinds back after, and
Yeah,
then they
yeah.
could make
I,
Superman the movie and then all this stuff. So it just hit this weird spot that you detail in the book, this weird era of, yeah, you ain't never going to see this thing.
yeah, yeah.
It's just so amazing. And let's talk about the actors. Let's talk about the episodes. Do you have a favorite Superboy between the two, or do you kind of like the combo platter?
I, what I think is interesting about their approach is that John Newton, and he said it in interviews at the time. I'm not going to mimic or ape Christopher Reeve's approach. Now, what's interesting is that this is a quasi prequel to the series.
Right.
The music of evokes the John Williams score. The
The
credits,
logo,
the logo,
right?
the credits are meant to evoke the Superman
Yeah,
wonderful opening credits. The look, the costume was based on the pattern of Christopher Reeve. So it's meant to be a prequel. It's meant to be Christopher Reeve Superboy
right.
as a boy. But he said, I'm not going to do it like Christopher Reeve. Uh,
Yeah,
which
the
which
bumbling
you saw
Clark,
I'm sorry, what?
the bumbling Clark, and the heroic Superman, the two different,
Exactly.
the
Yeah,
Cary
yeah.
Grant story. Right, right,
He said, I'm not going to do that. And he'll use
right,
Hawkeye. So I think that's a terrible idea. Um, but he didn't. He didn't do
right.
it. And he never really, I mean, he sometimes there's moments, but he doesn't lean into that. And then when you get to Gerard Christopher, his his first year, but the second year of the season, he does do the Christopher Reeve bumbling Howard Hawks type thing. But then when you get
Right.
to season 3 and 4, that's much less highlighted, and he's essentially playing Superman for seasons
Yeah.
3 and 4. And they said to me, they meaning the writers, producers, that they stopped calling the character Superboy because it just became sort of silly at that point because he's clearly an adult man.
Right. And then we saw this play out in Lois and Clark with Dean Kane's version. He just like Clark was kind of cool. He didn't have to do the
Yeah,
goofy thing. And you sort of see
yeah,
the genesis of that with the Superboy TV series. Do you have any favorite episodes?
yes. Oh wait, oh, and one other thing that is interesting about season one is that how people react to Clark Kent. He's sort of a ladies' man in season one, which I found surprising on the rewatch because that's not how most people would have written him. But
Hmm.
to answer the question that you actually did ask, what is
I
yeah,
know I
there's
like bouncing all over the place. I'm good. That's yeah. That's how my mind
there's
works too.
there's a lot of really good ones, and I think they might be your favorite too. I'll tell you, I think five-ish. There's the Mind Games written by Howard Sherman and Lex Luthor, where Superboy and Lex Luthor are trapped in a mine filled with kryptonite together. I love that. There's
Yeah.
Superboy Lost, where Superboy loses his memory and sort of starts a life with a woman and her child. There is Know Thine Enemy, where Superboy is forced to relive Lex Luthor's childhood memories. And then the other two are the quote roads not taken,
Hmm.
the two double headers where there are else worlds of different variations of Clark's and Superboy's timeline, including where Superboy becomes a fascist sovereign, takes over the world, and where Superboy meets an older version of himself, played by Tarzan Ronnie Lee. Oh, and
Yeah, great.
finally, the George Lazenby, Britt Eklund doubleheader where Superboy
As
meets
a James Bond author
Jor-El.
and fan, I knew you were going to say that one. Like, I was like, if he doesn't get to Bond Girl and Bond himself, that's got to be high up on
Yeah,
the list. Yeah.
those are really I know that the production value is not always great, but
Yeah.
the storytelling and these writings, they're very, when people say I'm going to make a comic book movie and they do it badly, it's more akin to, you know, uh, I don't know, Batman and Robin, where Joel Schumacher would scream, you're about to make a Batman movie. I don't Joel Schumacher, who was kind enough to allow me to interview him about that. So I
Yeah.
love his films, but that one is not his best. But you all know those over the top. We're making a silly comic book. We're
Yeah.
making it too camp, but the these writers like Carrie Bates and Mike Carlin and JD and Andy um, took a comic book premise, which is to say a something that could be told on a comic book cover, reversing powers, losing powers, gaining
Hmm.
new powers, and then you get the premise immediately, and the pleasure is watching it unfold in expected and unexpected ways.
Yeah.
Um, and Superboy does that. Superboy the series does that well.
I think you mentioned this in the book too. One of the original thoughts was maybe they were going to set it in the 60s. That's sort of like really cool
That was his
Superboy era.
that was
Yeah.
that was
But it was just
Peter
too cost
idea.
prohibitive.
Yeah.
Right. It wouldn't have worked because of a period piece. It would have, the cost would have been, but I think you get that vibe of that era
Yes.
in these stories, and I think that's why I appreciate the series so much and why so many people do, is that the 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 scripts are there, the heart is there, the effort is there. Every dollar is on the screen. He is flying around. I talked about this with both Superboys. They did hoist them up. forever up in the sky in a Florida sky. Um, and I think you see all that, and that plays out in the
Tremendous
series.
heart, tremendous heart.
Yeah. And
Like
like,
that's why I like
back in
that
the
Fantastic Four movie.
oh,
The Roger Corman,
the
tremendous
Roger
heart.
Corman one. Yes.
Yeah,
Everybody's putting their all into it. And like, even in the George Reeves series, like they're flinging a rubber gun at him and it's bouncing, you know what I mean? But we love it. We don't
yeah.
mind that because we love him and we love the stories and we love everything about it. So I think the same thing comes true in the Superboy. And when you see the work and it goes, when you detail it in your book the way you do, and you see the work, you feel all of that in it. So I think that comes across in the book. So highly recommended. Um, what's next for you? So we got this one now, Superboy. We're gonna go get that, add that to our library shelf. What's coming around the corner? Can you tell us? Can you give us a preview?
Not, I wouldn't say around the corner, around like a
Several
long
corners.
walk, a long walk. I'm working on an
A
Orson Welles,
flight
a flight.
overseas.
You're gonna have to transfer between three planes, and you might miss your
Fair.
flight, but hopefully you get there in time. I'm working on something on something Orson Welles related. So
Oh,
I was sort of do I tend to have two projects going on at once, and so
okay.
I've been writing back and forth, and so
A
yeah.
notorious radio broadcast, maybe?
Uh, no, no.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's the first thing that pops into my mind. That
I do have a
and
thing. Yeah, I
Rosebud.
mean, yeah, yeah. Orson Welles is sort of the best I could do
All
there.
right. Let's see. MarkEdlitz.com. That's the website. That's where
I
we go
think
to get
so. I
everything.
think so. Yeah.
What else? You're on social media. We go
I
out,
am
follow
so
you,
the Twitter, the Bluesky,
whatever they are now.
the Facebook. You know,
All the things. Mark, congratulations on the new book. Really enjoying it. I can't wait to go back and rewatch all the episodes now that I've got the book. Now that I can, I love doing that. Remote control one hand, the book in the other. I do that with everything, all these books that folks send to me. Congratulations on that. And thank you so much for joining me back again on Comic Book
it's
Central.
such a pleasure and a privilege to be on your podcast. So thank you for having me.